Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to a somewhat qualified episode of Small Town Failing Podcast. Not us in particular talking, we're more than qualified, me being a podcast. And Alys Murray is here, I should say. Quick introduction. Hi, Alys.
Hi, yes, I'm very qualified. Many people don't know that I spent the majority of my 20s making money going through Europe by singing in nightclubs and also solving mysteries. So this is like, it's weird that you asked me because I don't think you knew that, but here we are.
It was the voice. So I should say, Alys, more than qualified to be on here. Screenwriter, writer of numerous projects, the New Orleans Noel, My Southern Family Christmas, which I think we talked about a year ago. Every Time a Bell Rings, which I think was the first time that you have been on. And then a handful of books, which I 100% had the list in front of me, and now I look like I'm scrambling. But the Magnolia Sisters, which I actually 100% have on my Kindle. And despite something happened during COVID where I just stopped reading altogether. Like when I was commuting, I was like a book a week and I'm a slow reader to begin with. I have been going through your book for probably like 3 months at this point. And because it's like, I don't know, I get up and then I just stare at my phone and I never pick up a book anymore. And then plus the 4-year-old is up at 5 a.m., which just completely locks out my reading time. But I'm going to get through the entire thing. By no means is this a comment on the interest of it, because it is wonderful. But I'm getting there. And then I've just rambled for 3 minutes. But Alys, welcome. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
coming on in. How's everything going? You just got back from Finland.
I did. I was in Finland. I went to so many saunas and ate so many delicious pastry treats that I cannot pronounce and avoided so much salmon. So
A lot of salmon, a lot of fish over there, right? The only thing I know about Finland is I don't know if you ever listened to Monty Python when you were or you maybe dated and had friends, but I listened to a ton. And they had that song Finland, the country where I quite want to be. Yeah, that's it. That's all I know. But more importantly, you mentioned pastries, and I think it was a few days ago, you started posting on your Instagram about your journey into the world of croissants.
yes, croissant.
And I was so excited because I have attended that a few times as well, and they've come out okay. But yours looked, especially for first time, looked really well. And it looked like they tasted very good, right?
They did come out. I was shocked. You could have I thought I was gonna run through a brick wall. I was so strong after they came out, and they weren't all runny, or they had layers and they
Yeah,
looked.
once you see the lamination or whatever they call it, once you see the layers, it's oh, I've done something. Yeah.
Yes, and then I had a friend. I guess I call her a friend. She isn't. I met her one time at a
It's your
mixer
enemy
in
now.
2016. She's Belgian. And she Instagram messaged me and was like, I don't want to embarrass you, but it should be noted that these are not croissants.
Wait, what? Why?
And so I'm sorry, I probably just blew out the sound. But yeah, she totally was like, these are not croissants. This is not what this is. And we don't call them that in Belgium anyway. We call them this and this. And I was like, oh yeah, well, it was just my first time.
It
It
came out good.
deal, whatever.
But why aren't they? I don't know what qualifies. Is it the shape, or is it just the...
It's a great question. I don't know. I was so upset. I just
well, there was no explanation. It was just, no, these don't count, and that's it. Wow. I'll be honest, according to Starbucks, and they're my go-to for any definitive answer, those look like croissants. So, or maybe they're croissants and not croissants. Maybe if they don't have the little bend, that's maybe what determines. But whatever it is, they looked wonderful. I think the first time I made them, I think the only critique I had was mine. I used a lot of flour because I get so scared doing the folding, and so I could taste a little bit of that flour in between. But yeah, I mean, yeah, yours looked wonderful though, and you went with chocolate in the middle, or I think what is it, pain au chocolat?
Yeah, pain au chocolat.
Yeah, the way you say it sounds a lot nicer than my butcher. They got chocolate in there.
Well, see, that was all the experience I had doing cabaret singing in France, as I learned how to say it.
That's it. My other question. I had no idea is where croissants are from France. I've always assumed, or
They are, but they're very popular in Belgium, and I think
in
they
Bel.
all
All
like
right.
they're always very competitive. I think, like in
Mm.
terms of that stuff, like, like French fries, like they had that big. They literally like hired hundreds of the European Union hired hundreds of historians to determine legally who could call themselves like the originator of the French fry. Because
Oh,
Belgium and France used to have such intense fights about it, apparently, and
I
so Belgium
see.
won that one. So
Oh, interesting. All right. I mean, yeah, I guess that makes sense. It feels a little bit like Belgian. Like I just know from I'm a New Yorker. I grew up in New York, and it feels like Belgian might be the Boston of this relationship where there's just a lot of anger towards France, and France is like, no, we're France. Like we make the croissants. And they're like, no, 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 we're good. We're good. We could be better. You know, like I'm getting that impression. No offense to anyone from Boston, but uh, um, but I should say, and you've kind of alluded to the movie we're here to talk about, the Jane Mysteries, Inheritance Lost, starring one Miss Jodie Sweetin, who I think it's safe to say is Hallmark royalty at this point. But I don't think I have ever discussed with anyone a Jodie Sweetin movie on this podcast. So, one, I was very excited to finally get to that. And two, I've just recently kind of discovered or started to watch some of the more Hallmark mysteries movies. And it's interesting because like the format, I think we've talked a lot about even when, you've been on and on the other episodes, like Hallmark, traditionally has like a formula that they follow, but the mysteries one, it just throws everything out the window for the most part. And especially with this one, it's the first in what I assume will be a series as long as it does well. It came out back in May, but just was released on the Hallmark Movies and More app. So that's where we watched it. But I guess you obviously have a lot of experience in the Hallmark verse, but I don't think you've ever partaken in the mysteries, murder, magic, of this genre. So I guess what's kind of your experience with these movies, or at least this kind of section?
yeah, so I've done a little bit of work on them as a writer, sort of more behind the scenes. So, like, I've never originated one from scratch and then
Mhm.
brought it to the network. I've done like some script doctoring and some tweaking and punch ups and stuff
Oh,
like that,
nice.
which has been really fun. And then I'm about to, hopefully, once the strike is over, work on something kind of in the same vein for maybe like Tubi, which would be really fun.
Oh,
Fingers
interesting.
crossed. But yeah, they're interesting because it's almost the structure is more akin to that of like a Law and Order SVU episode,
Hmm.
right? Like you just have like two or three more acts in there,
Yep.
to kind of where you are more allowed to sort of build out like the romantic angle or the personal angle or whatever.
Right.
They really are kind of structured more like what we would think of when we turn on like TBS on a Saturday and just
Hmm.
blow through 17 SVU episodes. But
I
yeah,
think
so I
it's
don't have
funny
a ton of.
because like it speaks to my age. I relate it to Murder She Wrote, and you
Oh, of
relate it
course.
to SVO. Yeah.
Well, I think yours is more tonally appropriate, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Okay. Yeah. Good. Good. Let's go with that. That makes me feel better. um, but I guess have you watched a lot of these, or have you kind of dabbled, or is this more kind of your first delve into it? I mean, outside of the ones that you've kind of had a hand in.
I've seen a couple, but I think most of my experience, at least as a viewer in this realm, is more of the kind of lifetime woman in peril
Mm.
movies. Like I haven't
Yes.
really
Yeah.
followed a lot of like the women detective movies,
Yep.
which are it's kind of like a big subgenre on Hallmark. So I was really excited to dive in and see it, especially because this is the launch of the new series. It's not
Yes.
like
Yep.
Aurora Tea Garden where there are 15 million of them, and I don't have the inclination nor the patience. Like this is
Yeah.
different.
That's always been kind of my thing too. Like I've always kind of, I see them obviously and I know they're there, but it's like, where do you begin? And like going back and starting in, Murder She Baked or like one of those series, it's, especially because the majority of the movie watching I do is for this show. And, you know, like going back to the beginning is kind of like, oh, I don't know if it makes sense now. But yeah, like this one, I originally just when I saw it pop up, I'm like, oh, is this already a series? And it turns out it's not. But I think it's good because it sets up the whole thing, right? So, and if they make more, which I hope they do, like not to spoil anything, because I enjoyed this, but like I feel like I'm kind of here now, right? Like I've got the setup, and I'm not like just diving in, willy nilly. Um, and then what is your, I mean, outside of your own personal experience with French cabaret, like, so I should say, and to set this up and we kind of get in like the full discussion, the movie, The Jane Mysteries, follows Jane de Seville. And she is a cabaret singer, or, a well-known singer who has, tours, is in France right now, in Paris, doing a small stint at a cabaret. And I think at the beginning also they set up that like she's going to maybe Belgium or someplace else.
Carlo, like somewhere
There
else
you go. Yep.
super like
Yeah.
glamorous.
So she's gonna travel, and we get the impression she's touring at this point. And then literally as she's about to go on stage, this gentleman walks into the cabaret. And I will say I really enjoyed this movie. There's two things that stick out to me through the entire thing. And one is, kind of the main plot of this movie. And two is this guy, Detective John Cameron, walks in, pretty much says, I have some news to tell you. Your aunt sent me. Your uncle has passed away. And it's like, oh, okay. And, she's obviously upset and, very sort of visibly, emotionally upset about this situation, but then goes on stage, right? And like the first thing, Leslie and I watched this together, and I'm like, you couldn't have waited until after she finished? Like,
Right.
hey, your uncle's dead. Go knock him dead out there, Like,
It was very much like when Katy Perry got the text message as she was about to go on stage that she was getting divorced.
yeah.
Like, you've seen that moment in the documentary where she gets the text and like literally like the stage shoots her up into the crowd. Like, it was very much like that. Like, hi, here's some horrible news. Good luck out there. Have
Wait,
fun.
is that what happens in the documentary? I've literally like, we've had it queued up and I've seen it 100 times, but I've never actually pushed play. Like that happens as she's about to go on stage.
Yeah, it was horrible. It was so
All right.
sad.
That's the viewing for this weekend, if not tonight. Like, oh no, like, and I mean, I guess now looking back and with everything we've learned, maybe it's for the best. But like, yeah. Which, by the way, sorry, we completely started, but how is the strike affecting you? Not to completely derail us.
Yeah, I'm not in the union. I'm not WGA. I think most people don't know that Hallmark movies, but the majority of them are not covered under the union agreement.
Oh, interesting.
So I'm not in the union. Hope to be someday, but have not
Yeah.
yet made the points or whatever. So things have mostly just shifted over to the book side for me. So I've been writing stuff to send out to people once the strike is over,
Yeah.
but obviously not actively working on any projects right now, and then just kind of focusing in the book world, which has been really fun. So
Interesting. Yeah. There's always
obviously
Drew Barrymore too, that apparently, although she caved, right? Like she, kind of backed out.
Hallmark saved. Who'd have
Yeah.
thought? That's because SAG called and was like, "We're going to pull your SAG cards."
Yeah.
And you can
By
just
the way, yeah. All right, you were in ET, but that was a long time ago. Like, calm down. All right, where the hell were we? So she finds out her uncle passed away. She rushes back to Baltimore, which I think is originally where she is from. Like, it's a little loose, like her trajectory, but we kind of uncover things as the story unfolds. But finds out she passed away, goes back to Baltimore, and then we meet Sandy, who is her aunt, which that whole kind of situation I was a little confused with, because Sandy is her aunt, right? But she refers to her as Sandy. Like,
yeah, I
that's
don't know if
what
it
I was
was
having
like,
trouble with.
I don't know if it was her uncle's second wife. Because
Mm.
like at first it was almost like, oh, they're business partners or they're friends or whatever, and then she gets there and it's like, oh no, they were fully married.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was, I don't know if it was like second wife, whatever.
Because even, am I remembering this wrong? But I think she refers to her uncle as Harold a lot of the time too. Like, there's a lot of first names used for family, which kind of threw me off. And then, like, I know in my family we have like my uncle, whatever, who's not actually blood, just that's what we've always called him. So like, it was a little loose. So my first kind of confusion was this entire movie, as I understand it, takes place as her uncle has just passed away. I
Yes, it
think
does seem. like that.
Which makes like the whole tone, it's a murder mystery, but it's not, heavy in a lot of places. And every once in a while in my head, it just popped in like, don't you have to get back and like plan the funeral or something? Like, um,
Yeah, neither
so
of them seem to be particularly grieving very much
phased, right?
during the movie.
Like,
Well, Aunt in particular, she's like coming up with kooky schemes. She's like,
yeah,
here's my disguise closet.
right.
Like,
It was
she's
very
having
like, did we just not like Harold? Was that the thing? And then obviously the second thing that kind of sticks out to you is she goes back, meets Sandy. We kind of get the download. Turns out Harold is a retired, excuse me, not police officer, but like agent, like detective type object. He had retired and then apparently went a little stir crazy and then started this charitable organization or pro bono or whatever you want to call it.
he
Yeah,
was
go
an
ahead.
investment banker
There you go.
in
Oh, he
real
was an
life.
investment banker?
Yes, and that's why, spoiler alert, but later there will
Ah,
be like I can't do this, I'm a cabaret singer meltdown. And her aunt is like, well, your uncle was an investment banker. He didn't know what to do, but he just followed his heart and protected people.
that makes a lot more sense. For some reason,
Yeah.
I had it in my head that like, and maybe it's because this detective that pops up, Detective John Cameron, maybe that's like, I assume they work together or something, but okay, this makes more sense because the whole setup is he starts this organization where pretty much he takes on cases that the police could not solve. And, it's for people that can't afford or for one reason or another to hire a detective to kind of solve these mysteries. So, like, he does it out of the goodness of his heart. We get this room that he worked out of, and there's just boxes everywhere of cases. And that's when, you can kind of assume, but like in your head, you're like, oh, okay, this is going to be a series. This is what we're doing. And each one of these envelopes or boxes is a different case. Um, so, pretty much the idea is that Harold wants to leave this agency or organization to Jane and have her pick it up. And it takes some convincing, and she's not 100% on board, but she's kind of looking through the boxes and doing her thing. And we meet, what is it, Leah comes to the house, knocks on the door, says, hey, is this the organization that helps people? Here's my story. And I guess at this point, how were you feeling about this whole setup?
Well, I think the setup is really fun. And I know that,
Yeah.
like, I have talked to a lot of other writers who have tried to crack similar kind of organizations to this organization, right? Because, like, it's procedurals can be really dark and they can be really kind of police heavy. And
Yeah.
sometimes you want a story that's like very much about like people helping other people out of the goodness of their heart. I think that's really cool and admirable. I do think it is very wacky the
Yes,
way it's
exactly.
presented. It's like there's just this one crazy man in the back of his house who would invite people to tell them their most horrible stories, and he would try to help if he could, like
Yeah.
he didn't have an assistant, he doesn't have a friend, he doesn't have like a team. It's just
He just
him
does
and
it.
this one cop he calls every so often.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it is interesting, right? Because the whole kind of idea, and you start to see it later, maybe why, is that the police couldn't solve this, so I will. And, you know, even if he was the detective before, it turns out you're 100% right. He was an investment banker. It's like, why can he do this and the police can't? But again, it's very Murder She Wrote. Like you just kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. And I do think tonally, Jodie Sweetin is the perfect one for this, right? Because like she has sort of that lighthearted, air about her, or however you would put it. Like I think she handles it perfectly. And there are, and we'll get to it, like a couple instances later on in the movie where it's like, that does make sense. Like based on the fact that you are a singer, you're not an actual detective. Like, she's kind of learning as she goes. And I thought that was really interesting. And then Sandy is the other one who, we kind of talked about, but she plays a very big part in this. She's kind of the back at the office, helping coordinate things, like type object throughout this entire thing. And I really enjoyed her character. I thought she was great in this. Um, and we find out she was a singer at one point too. And we kind of see her, like you had mentioned, her closet, which, ends up being the setup for a lot of like the disguises and stuff. And like, I think to your point, it's a wacky setup, but like the costumes and the whole setup there kind of helps give it like all right, yeah, like I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm on board with this whole scenario.
Yeah, there was never
Um,
a moment where I was like, "Oh, I'm not here for it." Like
yeah,
it knew what it was. It knew like the tone was very consistent. I never felt like, oh, this is aside from the uncle being not 10 seconds in the grave and them like going on hijinks or whatever. Like I never felt like, oh, we're not treating this crime with like the sincerity it
yeah,
deserves. Like with all the kind of trappings of it, I still thought at its heart it was like a very cohesive and coherent movie. Like I
yeah,
really
for
did
sure.
enjoy this. Like there wasn't I really did.
Yeah, for sure. So we meet Leah, who is a child. I want to say maybe, what did she say, 12, I think, may have, or tossed out
Yeah, I
some age in
don't
there.
know because they say she has been accepted to Juilliard, so she has to at
Yes.
least be
Oh, yeah.
17.
Of
But
course.
she
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
seems so young.
She seemed a lot younger, yeah. So she's kind of there because her mom had passed away and it was ruled a suicide, but she doesn't 100% believe that. I think she even says like she was only one when her mom passed. So, all the information she's kind of got is through like her father and, any other members of the family. And her mother was found at the bottom of a pool with weights around her ankles and then a lot of I don't know what specific drugs were in her, but she was all kind of doped up in one way or another. And it's interesting because she's like, yeah, they ruled it a suicide. And immediately in your head, you're like, nobody does that. um, so they could never, pinpoint it to someone. And eventually it seems like just kind of gave up and ruled it that way, even to the point where her father, and I will never forget this, and I wrote it down in the notes, said, my dad said to let it go. I'm like, Dad? Seems a little harsh. But then we kind of, and we'll talk about it, kind of get the backstory and you sort of understand why. But this Leah coming there, she's like, all right, I'll take this one on. I'll give it a go. We'll see what happens. And like, that's when we're kind of off to the races at this point. And I'm curious what your take is too. Like, up until that point, it did have a little sort of lightness to it. But then once we get the mom in the pool and that stuff, it's like, oh, yeah, like we're back into like almost like a CSI territory, like you were saying.
Yeah, it was. And I think one of the things I liked the most about this movie is she treats the victim with like such respect and
Mm-hmm.
like they never in a lot of these shows I think SVU in particular I think is probably a very like pertinent example where they're like, oh yeah, she was she was doing coke and she was
Mm-hmm.
sleeping around and she was this and she was that, and you kind of sense a tinge of that sort of victim
Yeah.
blamey, you know you know but this movie was not like that. It was like, yeah,
Yeah.
she was having problems but she was working through them and she was doing her best and no one deserves this, and I'm gonna fight for justice and for the little girl she left behind. And like, yeah, so it does get like a little bit that image of her in the pool is
Yeah.
so striking, but
Yeah. That shocked me. Yeah.
I think it does also really ground Jane in like her
Mm-hmm.
journey and pushing her forward to really trying to bring justice here. So
Yeah.
I really liked that.
Yeah, it was interesting. It's a good point because they talk about mental illness because obviously the mother was struggling with a lot of things. And I thought it was really nice the way that nice, it's, it is, but the way that they handled it was not very like, all right, this person died, here's a mystery to go solve. Like they really kind of, especially with Leah, the daughter, like tug at your heartstrings and make you feel for the whole scenario. And also, I mean, we'll get into kind of the backstory. The whole idea is, and shoot, I should have the name in front of me, but the mother is this whole kind of setup is that she got involved with like a pyramid scheme and like excuse me, selling crystals, which came out of left field. I was not expecting to kind of pop up in this movie. Sorry. And even we get this commercial for the crystals with also the guy who runs the crystal scheme or company or whatever it is, Dwayne Wade.
No,
Like
it's Dwayne Wayne. Like, and I'm like, that,
Dwayne Wade.
but Dwayne Wade is a basketball player.
Right?
That's a famous guy. You can't use that name.
That's what I was like. Why would you go so close? Like, and also just Dwayne Wayne is a
Like,
ridiculous name to begin with. Like,
and his middle
it,
name is Robin. It's Dwayne Robin Wayne. I'm like,
there
that's
must
too
have been
much.
like the director or the writer like had to have known something. Like, there needed to be a reason for that because otherwise, also just with like the tone they give this guy of like he almost has like a David Miscavige air about him. Like it feel like you're uncomfortable around him. And like obviously, and I'll give a spoiler alert and put in the notes too of where you should skip, but like obviously he's a suspect because the idea is that like he has this company that is pyramid scheme. Like they pretty much pointed out right there. And what is it? Inner Ink. They sell crystals, and the idea is that you sell crystals to your friends and blah blah blah. And the mother kind of got involved with this heavily, ended up spending all of the husband's money, and like pretty much blew, I forget if they even say like what how much, but like a lot. um and that's kind of the backstory or why we find out that the husband, what is it, Kenny, um, was so pissed off, right? Because like one, I think, he believes that this was a suicide and it kind of put the family through the ringer. The daughter is obviously very upset and traumatized, rightfully so. And like he's just still very upset about the whole situation and having trouble coming to grips with it. And you tack on the fact that all of their savings was put into this pyramid scheme. Like he's not in a good place, right? And the first time we meet him is when Jane is over there and starts trying to ask questions. He gets just, like visibly angry, like tells her to leave, don't ever talk to, my sister or my daughter again. Like it's pretty intense. And like that I feel is like when the movie takes a bit of a turn of like, all right, no, we're in the thick of things now. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think my kind of I'd say favorite part of the
Mhm.
pyramid scheme angle, which one I was very shocked they went to talk about MLMs because that
Right?
seems like quite in the kind of Hallmark mom wheelhouse of
Exactly.
liking.
Yeah.
But I the whole time I just kept thinking like, what would it be like if instead of crystals, she was in like a leggings pyramid scheme?
Exactly.
Every person she's ever sold shitty leggings to is on the suspect list. We have to talk to 50 people right now. Like,
I am curious, like, why crystals? Like, what made them pick crystals?
I think one of the biggest ones and the one that's had to rebrand the most probably is like Young Living, doTERRA, like all of the essential oils ones.
Oh,
So I think maybe they were trying to go in that same vein. But I agree. I don't think I've ever heard of a crystals one. I've heard of some
no.
weird pyramid scheme or MLMs, but I have not heard of a crystals
Yeah.
one.
Which is maybe why they chose it, right? Like, they didn't want to be like, if they did leggings, it's like, all right, I see what you guys are saying here. But it's like crystals, it's like, nobody does that? So maybe that was intentional. So, that's when we're kind of off to the races with the whole mystery of things. And I got to say, and we'll spoil it at the end, but like, I at one point suspected everyone in this movie and never like there was no like, oh, I know who it is, at this point. Like there was times where I thought I knew who it was. But like I think it did a really good job of kind of keeping the mystery about it and not kind of giving too much away.
Hmm.
Did you
Yeah,
call it? You called it,
I
didn't
did.
you?
As soon as the character came on the screen, I was like, that guy did it.
Get the
That's
fuck.
it, no question.
I had someone that I'm like, I know I've got it 100%. It was not them. I'll tell it when we get to the spoils, but um, so yeah, so we meet the husband, and I don't think at any point like he's really a suspect, but he is very upset. And after she kind of has that confrontation with him, there's a scene where someone throws a brick through Jane's window. And like at that point, Sandy's like, oh, no, 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 you're on the right track because people are trying to stop you. And it's like, all right. But like, again, you're a singer. Maybe you shouldn't be risking your life. Um, but then she starts to get in touch with some of the mother was in a therapy session, right, with a group therapy. So she starts getting in touch with some of those people. She gets in touch with a therapist. She gets in touch with an artist who was a part of the therapy sessions, um, and starts kind of doing her detective work by that point. And at one point, the artist ends up getting murdered also, which I guess is sort of a spoiler, but it's midway through the movie, so I don't think we're doing anything too bad. But like, that's when we start to see some of the costumes and stuff like that. Like she's wearing like a wig and goes to the was it like a country club or
I
like
think so. Yeah.
all we saw was a pool.
Yes.
But um and at the country club we meet I forget her name, but this nice woman that works at the towel counter, who said she's worked there for like 8 years or something, which I thought was funny because she's at the towel counter, and like, how long have you been handing out towels by this point? But and that's when I really started to like this, right? Because they do like the costumes, and when she goes to the country club, I think she's wearing like this red wig and like, all kind of made up. And I think when she goes to the therapist, is that where she wears like the black wig, or am I making that up? There's
Oh, she wears the black
or the
wig. Later,
painter.
she tries to find where she can meet up with Dwayne Wayne. Um,
Oh, that's right.
she
Yes.
goes to the what is it? I keep wanting to say Intech, but I know that's not true.
It's the whatever so after the
His
Crystal Company kind of comes out and folds and everybody ditches it, he starts like a nonprofit type thing, Dwayne Wayne. And you're right, she wears like this black wig to try and go and meet him. Because as we're slowly finding out, the mother was really in debt and really involved with this crystals scheme, and like to the point where she's like telling the husband that, yes, I'm going to give away all our money and like all this. So I would say the kind of motivation for the mother and everything that goes on with the crystals, I was not super clear on. And I wasn't sure why she was so invested, other than they do say that she was having mental health issues. So maybe it was that. But like, I don't know. Did I miss something, or did you pick up on anything that?
Yeah, I know they said that she was like 'cause I think she thought the crystals were part of like her therapy, because they
Mhm.
talk about like
Oh,
the
right.
therapist being kind of woo woo or whatever. So I wonder if maybe it was like she saw it as part of her recovery and like being a better mom, and like I'm working on myself, and I think maybe that was part of it.
Hmm.
But also I've seen some people do some weird stuff with those pyramid scheme MLM things, like
Yeah.
women dropping $80,000 on moldy, dresses no one's ever going to buy. Like and you just keep buying because you think, oh, I'm going to work my way out of it eventually.
Yeah.
So I guess I get it. And then her therapist is kind of, doing stuff and making moves, and like all the
Therapist
people
was
are like,
real weird.
oh yeah, so weird.
She meets the therapist, and within 5 minutes, he's ready to write her a prescription,
Yeah.
which I
Oh
thought
my gosh,
was
that was
interesting.
so funny. I guess he was just trying to get rid of her, like he
Yeah.
was like, this person, I just need her out of my orbit. And he's like, yeah, anxiety meds. Sure, sure, sure.
Yeah. Oh, you need that? You need some of those? Like, yeah, I'm all over it. Go for it. Um, so we kind of talked about at the top where obviously it's a bit of a ridiculous scenario, right? Like a singer inherits a nonprofit detective agency and just kind of goes with it. But the thing there's this one scene where she finally does meet Dwayne Wayne at the country club, right? Like at the bar, where she goes to see people sing, and we see her sing too. And she confronts him and starts doing her questioning, and then just pretty much loses on him and like accuses him of murdering her. Like, I don't even know if accusing, like says you did this, and then starts grilling him about taking all these people's money, and like really kind of snaps. And I think the reason I liked that scene so much is because it did kind of say like, hey, I know I'm new at this. Like, I am not a professional. It's not like they set up, all right, I inherited this, I decided I'm going to do it, now I'm a professional detective, and like that's just where we go. Like it's very much like, oh yeah, she's still learning this, and she fucked up pretty big time, you know. But like I thought that scene was really interesting, and I really liked that they played it that way, you know.
Yeah, and I think because one sort of hallmark of all of of this genre is like the third act, like misaccuse, right? So you say,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's this person, and then there's like kind of the last minute twist of no, it's actually this person the whole time.
Yeah,
And I think this was a really clever way to like scratch that itch, but not have it feel like that's the formula. It
yeah,
came out of her real character being like passionate and caring and devoted, and I want to fix things. And I have this guy in front of me who I think killed someone. Like, I can't keep it in. I'm not,
yeah.
like Columbo and Jessica Fletcher and all these characters, like they're so good at keeping, kind of like professional decorum
Yes,
or like kind of that distance. And she doesn't have that
exactly,
yet. And I love that about
exactly.
it. I think it
Yep.
was great. Really love that
that
part as well.
that's why I really liked, because there was my wife and I, especially during the pandemic, we went back and started watching all the Murder She Wrote. And like the first episode is like, oh, I guess this is what I'm doing now. But for all intents and purposes, she's a detective, you know, and it clicks. And I guess the idea is, you know, she's written these books, so she knows what to do. But like, I don't think I've ever seen where they're just like, yeah, no, this is not my regular day job, and I'm still kind of getting used to it. And here's what happens. And I guess with that, like maybe let's get into spoilers. So I would say now, if you don't want to know what happens, jump ahead. I'll put in the notes of the description here where we're, you know, kind of lead off, and you can kind of skip ahead. But like this scene where she confronts Dwayne Wade, and for the whole thing, all signs kind of point to him, right? Or him having some sort of involvement, because the idea or the way it's set up is that like the mother is very involved with him, very sort of in on this crystal scheme thing, and like trying to bring all the friends in. So you get the impression that her and Mr. Wayne are kind of joined at the hip, or like he at least knows who she is. When in reality, when Jane confronts him, he's like, look, there's thousands of, you know, if not more people involved in this thing. Like, I don't know everyone. And she may have been at some of the conferences and may have been involved. And I know I screwed up, but I don't know who she is. And kind of the finger pointing at him was that he was at the country club every day, but the day that they found her body, he disappeared and was like in some other country and never came back again, right? So, you know, again, you kind of go back to like, what were the police doing? Like, why did they look into this? But it turns out he has like a really strong alibi, and that's kind of like the, oh, okay, then who did do it? And I guess you set it up because you called it. I did not. Do you want to kind of give the big aha? Here's who did it.
Yeah. So she has the confrontation with Dwayne Wayne, who I have to pronounce his name so
Mm-hmm.
specifically. I don't want to get sued for libel here or slander. But yeah, so Dwayne Wayne is not the killer. But it turns out that the towel lady from the country club is
Yes,
married to creepy therapist, and
creepy
they
therapist. Yep.
did well, the creepy therapist did the murdering, but she was sort of an accomplice in the murdering or cover up
Yep.
of murdering, because they were going to do some she had the victim had a sizable inheritance that she had just come into, like $250,000 or something.
Yep.
And so the therapist sort of played her and her mental illness in order to get that money for himself, right? Like, I'm remembering this correctly.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And then the wife, I guess her kind of involvement is because she worked at the country club. Like she deleted the security footage or whatever, right? Like any sort of like information that would have pointed back to the therapist. And as soon as it kind of comes out, you're like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. The therapist who was like offering up prescriptions like they were nothing, like that tracks. But it was like, I thought they hit it very well, because I'll say the person who I thought originally was Detective John Cameron,
Oh,
because
see, my only other one was the aunt.
Oh, Sandy? Oh,
Yeah,
not Sandy.
I was like, just because I was like, it's a suspicious thing. Oh,
Yeah,
your uncle's died. Now he wants you to take over the business. I'm
that is
here. I'm
true.
luxurious. I'm
Sandy's
calm.
showing no emotion about the uncle being
No,
dead. So, like, maybe.
exactly. So I was like Sandy for sure. That would be my only other guess. But why John Cameron?
So, here, why I thought it was John is because for most of the beginning, and even to kind of step back, at the beginning, there's kind of this tension between Jane and John. Uh, and I wasn't 100% sure why, other than John did not think Jane was qualified to kind of be a part of this. And John was very close to the uncle, it sounds like. So I think he's just very protective of this. But like, they kind of put this tension between those two, and it never felt very warranted to me. Like, I wasn't sure why they had like kind of these butting heads right off the bat. But they obviously warm up to each other. But for most of the first act, John is very much like any sort of ideas that she had of like why this could have been a murder rather than a suicide. He's very much like, well, no, that can be explained with this. Like, he was very dismissive of a lot of things. And in my head, I kept thinking like, oh, he's trying to cover this up. Like, he knows, so he's trying to brush it aside. So obviously he had something to do with it. I think it turns out that it's more just that's the way that that police office works. You know, when they just assume, a person with weights tied around their ankles was a suicide. Like, so, maybe John's more trying to cover up the fact that his, coworkers did a terrible job trying to solve this thing. But like, he was the one that I was like, oh, he has to have something to do with it because he keeps trying to like brush every idea she has under the rug. Um, but yes, it turns out it's the therapist, and the therapist also killed the painter, right, Richard, for similar reasons. And I think the other thing that threw me off a bit was like at the end, it was like, oh, he was Richard's therapist also, and they kind of made that a little aha moment. And I got the impression from the start that Richard was a part of the group therapy with the mother also. So I was kind of like, yeah,
Because I
oh,
think
okay,
they
yeah,
say that, right? Where they're like, "Oh, you were in group therapy with her," and he's like, "Yeah, well, she got me into the pyramid scheme thing, and then she
yeah.
went to private therapy, so I didn't see her anymore." And so I think he kind of
I
it's
thought they
hinted at
implied,
that he knows
yeah.
more than he knows, but
So I guess that's why I was confused, because Jane has this moment in the therapist's office where she's like, "Oh, that's Richard's painting," and I'm like, "Yeah, like I thought we just assumed that, right?" Like, um, but yeah, so he murdered Richard in this scene. We didn't really talk about, but like, Jane goes to Richard's apartment to try and talk to him again, finds Richard murdered. Jane gets hit over the head, and pretty much gets attacked. I didn't fully understand why the therapist didn't just murder her also at that point. He probably could have saved himself a lot of time and not gotten caught if he had, but I guess maybe he's got a moral. But yeah, so I'll say, I was still kind of surprised at the end when it came out, and which is why like I kind of appreciated this, that like there was a lot of finger pointing in this, and at one point or another, like anyone could have been a suspect. So I really appreciate the way that they did this, and you know, it kept me kind of guessing till the end. And then we kind of get this nice bow on the top where Wayne is gonna pay for Juilliard school for Leah. Like, everything kind of wraps up nicely. And the thing I kind of like about these is, since I think they're kind of setting it up for a series, is like there's no kind of, wet kiss at the end or anything, right? Like, it's just like, all right, Jane and John are friendly with each other now, but there's no like romance there. Like, we just kind of wrap things up, and that's where it is. But I guess, what did you think of the ending? You had called it, so you were ahead of me, but like,
I thought it
did
was great. I thought it was really
yeah.
satisfying. I thought all the pieces were kind of laid out in a really cohesive and understandable way. Um, I liked that the young woman got to go to Juilliard in
Hmm.
the end, even though Dwayne Wayne only got to give her that because he has scammed millions and millions of people, just
Yeah.
like her mother out of money. But like, whatever. Yes, great,
No,
great.
no, no, no. I helped this one person. Everything's cool now.
Right, right. Yeah. Totally, the slate is clean. Um and I like that, you kind of get the hint, Jane and John are dancing at the end. They have like a
Yeah.
little kind of button scenes. You can see the will they won't they that's coming down the track. But it wasn't like, and now we're in love after being together for
Yeah,
like, I don't know, 12 minutes, you know? It was a
exactly.
good sort of, look ahead. It'll be fun and great when we get to it.
Yep, for sure. Nice. So the big question in the Jane mysteries, you're happily ever after. Who from, all these suspected murderers do you kind of ride off into the sunset and see yourself spending the rest of your life with?
I mean, I do love Jane. I think Jane's got a
Yeah.
good head on her shoulders. She's funny. She's competent. She's a little silly. I like that. But I mean, Sandy is just
Yeah.
one of my favorite characters I've ever seen in a Hallmark movie.
Yeah.
She's
I
ridiculous.
the moment
There's
Sandy
one,
walked on screen, I'm like, yeah, you're the one. So yeah, I'm in full agreement there.
dear viewer slash listener, this is a spoiler, so if you don't want a spoiler, I totally get it. But there is one moment where Jane thinks that Jane thinks that Sandy has been killed.
Yeah.
She's like sprawled out across the floor,
Such
totally
a
motionless.
weird because it like has nothing to do with the
No.
murders or anything. Yeah, yeah, sorry, go
So
ahead.
it's like right after Jane has been like gotten hit over the head and she's coming back home to kind of like, nurse her wounds or whatever. And she finds Sandy just sprawled out as if she's also been murdered on the floor. And Sandy's like, yeah, I was like doing something on a ladder and I had heels on. No worries. It's okay. I'm all
Yeah.
good. Just laying
Like
here.
don't
Okay.
climb ladders and heels, Sandy, but I appreciate you that like at any given point I know I could drop. So like if they're going to find me, I want to be at my best. So like yeah, yeah, Sandy, which by the way, Paris Jefferson is the actress and I don't know a ton of her work, but she did play Athena on the Xena warrior princess and like all the movies. So like she was kind of, in a bunch of those episodes and like the movies that they made out of it and stuff. So if you're a Xena warrior princess fan, Athena's here, and ready to, solve all your mysteries. So that's the Jane Mysteries, Inheritance Lost. I'm assuming, I don't want to speak for you, but thumbs up on your side. Yeah, yeah, definitely for me too. And I really hope, I haven't seen anything as far as they're making more of these, but obviously they're setting up that way, and I'm assuming it did well. So I'm really looking forward to when they do because I really kind of like the premise of this and thought it was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's the Jane Mysteries. Smalltownfailingpodcast.com is the website. You can get Twitter, Instagram, all that fun, all the socials. Post it up. We got excuse me, a couple questions or maybe just one this week on Instagram that asks, what other celebrity would make a good detective?
Oh, that's a great question.
Like the
Oh, I need
first
to
one
get
that
to
popped in my head, and only because we've been watching Only Murders in the Building, but Selena Gomez just seems like she's a wonderful person. Um, but I don't know. I couldn't think of like the perfect one either, but I'm sure they're out there. Sigourney Weaver kept popping in my head for some reason.
that would be a good one. The first
Yeah.
one who comes to mind, kind of in like the twee Benoit Blanc style, is Stanley Tucci. Like I want to see Stanley
Oh,
Tucci like go across Italy drinking Negroni and solving murders. I think that would be my.
absolutely. Yeah, like he could do like the chef thing and then also like solve mysteries and stuff. I don't know why I think Melanie Griffith would be very nice too.
Yeah, that would be a great one.
This is complete. Now we're completely off topic, but do you remember by chance when like the internet was in its infancy? Melanie Griffith had this website called Avalon, and it was her like personal website. And I'm sure there's clips of it on YouTube or something. It doesn't exist anymore, but like it was the most batshit insane website that's ever existed. Like, I'll find it on YouTube or like there's got to be sites that kind of talk about this. It was one, I mean, for like being in the early web, it was very well done, but it was like you went into like her diary and it was like, here's my diary. Like when you went to the page and like previews of her upcoming movies and stuff, you would go to the page and you'd hear her speak first peek. Like it was amazing. And the entire thing was laid out almost like a choose your own adventure, but like with like a mansion and like you go through the gates and like I gotta find this. Like it
Please
was,
do.
and I'll, you know what? I'll put it in the notes too of the movie because it was every time I think of Melanie Griffith, or even just she's in a movie or something, all I can think about is that website. And like, it sounds like a fever dream the way I talk about it, and the fact that like nobody else remembers it. Like, but it was a real thing. And we need to cherish her for that reason. So that was the one question we got this week. Smalltownfailingpodcast.com. You can find Instagram, Twitter, Cameo if you're looking for that special gift. Smalltownfailingpodcast@gmail.com if you want to send in questions. Instagram, Spotify, iTunes reviews, or wherever you listen. Thanks to everyone that's done that. If you haven't, please do. It's a huge help. AlysMurray.com is the website, ALYS. Alys. And then you're also on Instagram and all the other funds. I guess, where can everybody find you outside of the website?
Yeah, Instagram, Twitter. I think that's it. I was briefly on TikTok and decided that was not for me. And I'm also secretly hoping Elon Musk makes everybody pay for Twitter so I don't have to do that anymore either. So
I saw that. Like,
folks.
because I saw it today too, and I secretly, or not secretly, like I hope it happens too, because I feel like Threads came out and we were all like, yes, we're gonna abandon ship and we're gonna go there and it's gonna be a great thing. But then Threads turned out to just be a bunch of feeds that I did not sign up for, and I don't know why I'm getting them. And everybody just stayed on Twitter and then sometimes posted the same stuff on Threads. So like, I really hope he starts charging. Like, that's kind of the nail in the coffin and people jump. Because yeah, like, I'm still on Twitter. I'm by no means, I'm definitely part of the problem, but like, I haven't been able to break away. And I got to say, TikTok, the only reason I love it is because mine is like 90% gardening and then like baking and stuff. Like, you change your algorithm, and my wife, like, hers is all just like celebrity gossip and then like murder stories, and like, I'm next to her like, look, bees, it's nice. um Alys, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on and do this, as always. I'm very excited for your microphone. Things sound wonderful. I think we've got, and then you've done a couple of other things as of late too, right? Like, I was on some sort of Patreon type wall thing that I'm making up right now for another podcast. Am I lying about this entire thing?
Oh, right. Yes. I'm going to be doing a Q&A next week for the Hallmarkies podcast for their patrons. So I will be doing that and answering all questions that I am allowed to within the confines of the strike.
Nice. Oh, that's right. Yeah, because you have to, because I think I listened to Conan's podcast, and even he said on the latest one is like, we can't promote anything. Like, you can't promote like anything on TV, which, I get and I appreciate. But it's got to make some of these conversations like a little more difficult, which I don't know. Am I just talking about this movie? Am I a scab? Does that make me?
No, you're not. You're not in the guild. You're not,
Ugh,
it's different. It's different for you.
thank God.
Like,
I don't want
reviewers
to.
can still review, fans can still post about movies. Like, this is not like
I know people hold me in a high regard above Drew Barrymore, and I don't want that to be taken
no
away.
one exactly.
Yeah. Alys, thank you again. This has been so much fun. I don't know what we're talking about in the next episode, but it'll be wonderful. And yeah, I think that'll do it for this time. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time. Did I push the button? I didn't push the button. There's the button. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.